just sit there, bask in the euphoria. Thank you so much, Canadian Film Festival!
Hello, everyone. My name is Jen Pogue, and I am the industry series producer here for the Canadian Film Fest. Here at the CFF, we are devoted to the celebration, promotion, and advancement of Canadian filmmaking talent. I would like to start by wishing everyone well who is watching today. On behalf of the CFF, we all hope that you are staying safe and healthy. An immense thank you to the frontline essential workers who are out there putting their health at risk to ensure our safety. And thank you to those who have stayed home throughout this weird time in an effort to flatten the COVID-19 curve. It is because we are at home that the CFF is very proud to launch our first ever virtual industry series across the nation, and with our first live streamed panel today. This would not be possible at all without our incredibly supportive sponsors, our own personal superheroes, Super Channel, the Distillery Restaurants, and Retake Furniture Rentals. Please check out the Canadian Film Fest website for more information on our industry panels and events throughout the next 3 weeks, as well as our stellar lineup of films, which we are so excited to present through Super Channel. We will be taking audience questions throughout this conversation, so please feel free to write your questions in the comment sections on our Facebook and YouTube streams. Our team will be fielding them and sending them over to our moderator, Brendan, of whom I am very happy to introduce. Brendan Carmody is a producer, director, and stuntman with integral roles at Don Carmody Productions and Pivotal Post. Brendan, I will let you take it from here and introduce us to our incredible panelists. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Jen. I appreciate it. And thank you again for having us. It's exciting to do this for a second year. Thank you, everyone that's joined us. I appreciate you as lending an ear, and I'm sure you're all eager to hear some of the things that Don and David have to say, especially with the COVID situation that's going on. I guess we'll start with a little bit of an intro for the two of them, not that either one of them need it. Don, he has been a local and worldwide producer for over 40 years, well over 100 credits to his name, and numerous nominations and awards. David, also a local Toronto producer and production development. He has been very successful. He's got numerous nominations and awards as well. And he is also working very closely with different streaming companies like Netflix and Amazon and CBC. And his everything he knows about how that works is just so invaluable. So thank you, both of you, for joining us. We really appreciate your wisdom in this ever-changing industry. And it's always nice to see people willing to give back and share some of their time. So why don't we start it off with the two of you giving a little bit about yourself. Dawn, maybe we can start with a quick recap about how you found yourself in this business, formed your own production company, and ended up with the title Hollywood's Man in Canada.
It's gonna take too long. So no, I mean, look, I started right out of university. I went to one of Canada's very first film schools, and through a lot of luck and hard work, I hope, managed to get a foot in the door very young, and started producing when I was 23 years old. First up being David Cronenberg's They Came From Within, or which was also known as Shivers, and and then it was on and on from there through the early horror movie days, where I did 3 David Cronenberg movies and a bunch of other horror movies, and then segued into comedy, doing Meatballs and Porky's and Weekend at Bernie's and a lot of other ones, and then eventually doing a number of things. Right after Meatballs, I moved to Los Angeles and established myself there. And then within a few years found that I was bringing Hollywood movies back to Canada to shoot, because I was telling everybody how great it was. And I was really fed up with the system in Los Angeles, which is heavily unionized, and a lot of waste and everything else. And then started bringing Hollywood movies to Canada, first Columbia Pictures, then Warner Brothers and Disney, and and have done a ton of co-productions since then. Once the co-production situation in Canada opened up, I took full advantage of it. And French-Canadian co-productions, German-Canadian co-productions, UK-Canada co-productions, et cetera, which allows us to punch above our weight. So all of the Resident Evils are co-productions. The Silent Hill movies are co-productions. Most of the movies I do, it seems, my most recent one was Death of a Ladies' Man, which was an Irish-Canadian co-production. So I've been going on, and I forget how many between TV, which I got into about 5 years ago, when David came on board. Between TV and film, it's about 140 credits now. So keeping busy, keeping off the street.
Never-ending battle. So how did you and David get connected to form the TV division?
People had been after me to set up a television division for quite a while, and I resisted it because I really didn't watch television. I didn't quite understand it. I was really on Silent Hill when, I was working with Sean Bean and Kit Harington, who were both in Game of Thrones, and it was Game of Thrones hadn't come out yet, but it was coming out, and the two of them drove me crazy to see it because they really wanted me to see it. So I kept putting it off, and then Sean came to me and said, "Well, I'm leaving next week. You have to watch this show and tell me what you think." And I watched the first 2 episodes, which I had recorded, and I was like, wow. So at that stage, I said, well, wait, if this is TV, if this is the new face of TV, I understand it, I can do it. What I didn't understand were, sitcoms and, the police procedural of the week, where the crime and then you solve it in an hour and all that. I really wasn't all that interested. But in longer form, or taking series and stretching out the storyline, that I did understand, and it got me going. And then mutual acquaintance introduced David to me and suggested that he was the guy to run the TV side. So we went ahead for a 2-year plan, and we were in production well before the 2 years was up. So it's been working out. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, David, let's take it over to you for a little bit. Same kind of question. You've had quite an interesting start to your own career. What kind of drew you to filmmaking, and why TV instead of film?
Boy, I would say my origin story is a little bit different than Don's, obviously, in that I started out as an actor, and that was sort of where I thought I was going to go and where my career was going to continue to go. But very early on, I was always the bridesmaid, never the bride, and that sort of led me to some frustrations about, the roles that I was going out for, and I sort of thought there was better stuff that could be there, and that led to a little bit of writing. And then that also led to the realization that you need to find someone to produce your words. And so I started heading out to every film festival that I could think of or that I learned of. Then started going out to markets like Banff, to MIPCOM, just sort of traveling around the world, building up my network that way. And initially, I was sort of, calling myself a producer, having only really ever done, short films and corporate videos and stuff like that. And then eventually sort of landed a job as a development executive at a company out in Saskatchewan, Mind's Eye Entertainment. And I worked there for 4 or 5 years, building my way up as a development exec into a producer on their productions. And actually, as Don sort of mentioned, during our transition, we actually did a film together that sort of crossed the bridge of all of that. And then that sort of led to these conversations of getting into television. And the irony was actually when Don and I first started out, we were sort of in the States and the rest of the world, we were adored for our feature film backgrounds. In Canada, there was a little bit of reticence, being like, well, you guys are the feature films. How could you possibly, understand television? But the reality is it's still narrative storytelling, and you're just expanding those arcs and really sort of hunkering into those characters. So it's been a fun journey in that respect, sort of getting into some of these stories where you can really sit in there and explore these worlds and concepts and themes and live with these characters a little bit longer. And so that sort of takes us to the present here. Between was our very first TV series that we got out of the gate. As Don mentions, it was well before that 2-year timeline. And that was with a couple of other filmmakers as well, Mike McGowan who was the creator and the showrunner behind that. And we also partnered with the team over at Elevation Pictures. So again, we brought the power of feature film to television and brought what we feel is fairly cinematic quality to that storytelling.
Perfect. Yeah, that was definitely a fun project to work on, and there seemed to be a really good response from the viewers that were watching it.
It was
Yeah, we
also
still
the
get
first
like every
Canadian Netflix picture. So,
Oh,
right?
really?
Yeah.
Interesting. That's great. Can you guys talk a little bit about how the two divisions at Don Carmody Productions work, or is it very much separate? Do you guys do things hand in hand?
There's some crossover, but generally features is kept separate, and it's less development. But there are some crossovers. Like David brought Tulipani to me through people he'd been talking to with for TV. There are other features that have come in through people that he knows that we're developing, type of thing. But generally, that the feature side stays pretty separate from the TV side, and then TV. The stuff that we're doing now actually has a lot of connection to the feature side. We're developing a program with my French partners on the Silent Hills and Lucky Day, and basically called the House of Night, which is something that they brought to us as a television thing. And then other projects as well that have, we've been involved with my German partners on the Resident Evils on some television stuff as well, and Italian co-productions and what have you. So we're using the co-production system as well in television as features.
And then when you guys are developing content, how much of a different process is there between film and television? You said that television tends to be a little bit more development heavy in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
David,
it definitely is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the TV side, you're having to create these worlds, especially as Don sort of mentioned. We haven't really done a lot in terms of the procedural, series. So we're focused mainly on serialized content, and that's really about like developing and how many seasons is that, how many episodes per season, and really arcing out that journey for your central character or characters if you're following a couple. But so it's very much more in our experience, a lot more intensive on the development side. Bringing in multiple writers, breaking out those stories. We're very fortunate at our offices to have the space to have breakout rooms and stuff like that to bring writers in and sort of whiteboard out seasons or series as well. Whereas a feature, you're often just working with one writer, and you might send it out to other writers for their feedback or opinions, but that's, I would say, it's a much more COVID approved process versus the writer's room now, which is, we're having to, revert or find out these other avenues and ways in which we can still maintain the room without that personal connection every day.
So you must be doing a lot more video stuff like this.
Yeah, Zoom has been, one of those things that I've been using it now for almost a year, but I think everyone else just started about 2 months ago, learning what it is and how it works and whatnot. But yeah, it's been actually quite a powerful tool. It's funny. I mean, there's so many different ways to do it in terms of like there's Skype, there's FaceTime, there's WhatsApp, there's Google Meets, Google Hangouts. There's no shortage of these as options, and so sort of similar to screenwriting. Some people use Final Draft or Screenwriter or Keltex, or there's a whole bunch of others. So it just sort of comes down to preference. But Zoom has been the one that I find that we're using more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, after all, the show has to go on, and we have to find a way to keep working, even if we are separated.
Yeah.
I got a good question here from Liz. She says, "Hey, is it advisable for an indie showrunner to make a proof of concept for a series pitch to the networks, or is it better to have better for the network to show interest first before and have them put some funds in?"
You go ahead, David.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it sort of depends on. I'm assuming you're Liz, that you're asking in regards to scripted content rather than lifestyle or reality. My understanding on the lifestyle reality side is you absolutely need that proof of concept because that's usually host or talent driven, and you want to see how that person's interacting in those environments. There are broadcasters that are paying to create those. But that's not really what we focus on. We're strictly in that scripted space. On the scripted side, it really comes, I wouldn't say that you would need that necessarily. Sometimes that can actually be a disadvantage to you because you're likely going to be doing something on the cheap for something that doesn't, it's not cheap, right? An episode of television is a multi-million-dollar endeavor. And if you're going to go and try and make a promo for that on a shoestring 20, 30, $50,000 budget, is it going to be indicative of the actual show that you're looking to make? And there might be some genres that you can get away with that. But on the whole, it might actually hurt you because when you send it out for people to look at, they're going to look at that as if it's the final product. And that might not be as representative of the show that you're looking to sell ultimately, especially if like the special effects aren't up to snuff and stuff like that.
Got it. That's definitely a good point. With that being said, can you talk a little bit about the process that you go through when you're pitching to some of the digital media services like Netflix or Amazon or CBC, and kind of how that's maybe changed over the last few years since there's been more providers that have come into the market and it's become a more popular kind of method of watching material?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're seeing everyone's trying to sort of plant their flag in the ground. And there are more and more places to sell than there ever have been, but they're all highly specialized for the most part. You're seeing a little, obviously like Netflix and Amazon are a little bit more like the main networks in that they're fairly broad in what they have on there. But they do have very targeted niches that they're looking to build up and bolster in terms of their slates. In terms of pitching, I mean, it's not any different to pitch a broadcaster than it is to pitch a streamer in the sense that you're still telling a story. You're still, selling the team that's involved. So it's about romancing the story behind the story and providing the confidence to them that you are the team that can carry this through and deliver on what it is that you're selling, you're pitching. Where we are seeing some of those differences is in terms of like the order numbers. Over the years, it's changed a little bit, but now it's like, Netflix is heavily favoring a 3-season, 10 episodes per sort of arc for series, right? But it's not to say that there are exceptions to all of that, right? There absolutely are, and we're seeing those on a case-by-case basis. But I would say, like, even in COVID right now or post-COVID, there's going to be a favoritism towards lesser order or lesser episodic orders.
Yeah, I mean,
and I don't know if that's
the old days with the networks was 26 episodes, and that was a season. And now a season can be 6, can be 5, can be 10 seems to be the sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly.
So very different.
Great. And then, so these days, where are you guys finding your material? Is it something, David, that you wake up in the middle of the night and write on a notepad, or are you guys finding novels that you're pulling from comic books?
Yeah, it's a combination. Some of it's original spec material that have been submitted to us from writers or their agents that we've gravitated towards. So it's a bit of a cross section, but a lot of it, I would say, is usually based on some sort of IP initially. Like Don mentioned, House of Night, that's based on a series of 18, 20 plus books that have sold millions of copies worldwide. We've recently been involved with Mark Sakamoto and his book Forgiveness, again, another Canadian bestseller. So there's quite a fair amount that we do have that is IP based. Don with the features has been, Resident Evil and Silent Hill are based on video games. So really anything is a a potential target for an adaptation. But then we do also have some of the original stuff that, Brendan, you're actually absolutely right. Like, it is not necessarily an idea that I come up with at 2:30 in the morning and I jump out of bed to write it down. But, there are some avenues and stories that we go, this is a world that we really want to tell and get into. And then we will commission writers, and sometimes myself included, to build out that world and that story a little bit more before we start taking it to networks and sales agents and distributors around the world.
Right. With that being said, Maurice asked a great question. She says, a lot of voices ranging inside and outside the industry have been calling for better representation of people of color, LGBT, and disabilities to be on camera as well as behind the camera. While there's been some progress, different shows like Kim's Convenience and Schitt's Creek, majority of Canadian content is focused and created by straight white people. Are there any plans or initiatives in place that are currently in effect at Don Carmody Productions? Is this something that you guys are, kind of already doing throughout your projects?
Well, certainly when it comes to gender, we've already done that. We were very careful on Northern Rescue that, half the directors and half of the writers were, actually the bulk of the writers were female. It's gender neutral casting as much as possible. So, if a character happens to be written white and they bring in a Native American, hey, fine, we'll look at it. Definitely open to that. And we're involved with writers of color and of not only Black, but also Southeast Asian, et cetera, et cetera. Constantly entertaining material from all over the place. So, it's
Yeah,
not
and ultimately what we're finding.
Yeah.
What we're finding is by bringing in those different voices, you actually elevate the material because you're bringing in perspectives that we wouldn't ordinarily see, and it's not to negate our own perspectives; they're equally as valid. But just by having that smorgasbord of perspectives is ultimately healthy, and it's more representative, frankly, the Canadian population and also where the world population is heading as well. So you would be a fool not to include as many voices and representations as you possibly can.
Yeah, and we're working with a trans showrunner on one of our series hopefuls right now. So we're open to good ideas and good people, no matter where they are and who they are.
So as long as they're right for the job, they can get it.
Oh yeah, pretty much. As long as they're approved by the streamer and the network. So.
Cool. Well, so with that being said, these days, what do you guys suggest is the best way for producers to find out what the studios and digital media companies are hungry for?
Ask them.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many resources now that are available. They're especially right now during this time. I feel like everyone's on a panel or doing these talkback sessions. You're going to find over the next month or two that the networks are going to have to be a little bit more creative about that because they can't do their upfronts anymore in these, the traditional means. So I think, just by reading what's in the trades, you're seeing, C21 and the Hollywood Reporter and Variety, they're all daily announcing what's being picked up, what's being canceled, and the clues are right in front of you, right? So you just have to be, vociferous in your own education and what you're reading.
That being said, don't be a copycat.
Yeah,
you got to be.
Yeah,
it's all about originality. So
don't chase the trend, because by the time you've gotten there, it's already over.
Yeah. I mean, good material will always out. So, you don't have. It doesn't have to be a particular genre. Yeah. Unless you're really interested in that genre and you have something that speaks really well to that genre. So,
And now here's the big question of the day. I'm sure the one that everybody wants to talk about is COVID and how it's affected the industry. I mean, obviously, we all know that things have kind of shut down, and David's commented that, you know, people are pretty much working via video conference. How has that affected you guys? And, you know, what's your kind of plan to kind of move forward through it?
I don't know how it affected. I mean, we were in our first week of pre-production on a small feature and had to shut down and, pay off a lot of people to, who had already started. And, when it happened, we thought, oh, this is going to be, a couple of weeks, maybe a month. Now it's obviously much longer. So, we have actors attached, and we have, sales to, US distributors and other worldwide distributors that are based on having these actors available, that director available, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know if they're going to be available when we finally can get our act back together. And then on top of that, if it's before a vaccine, if we have to jump through the hoops that are being proposed to resume production, I don't know how we do it, because they're very expensive and very restrictive, and I think they make filmmaking pretty difficult as well as expensive. And then we have questions like, can we get insurance? We're hearing that no, we are not going to be able to get insurance that is going to cover things like COVID-19 or other communicable diseases. And then the banks are, who for a long time, especially with me, because they knew I never had any problems, never required a completion bond. But now they're talking about, well, maybe now we do need a completion bond. And of course, will a completion bond, take a movie and insure it if you can't get your cast covered for communicable diseases? There's so many unknowns out there, and I know that every day I get sent new proposals for how a film set's going to work, and then they just keep getting more and more restrictive. And and now the unions are saying, don't sign any COVID waivers without checking with the union, and that's going to be difficult as well. So there's so many things out there that need to be addressed. So I don't know how, and especially in Canada, where so many movies are made for very cheap, I don't know how they're going to be able to afford to do some of this stuff.
Yeah, because even talking to some of our colleagues over in the UK, obviously they were one of the first to announce the new guidelines for moving forward. And then when you actually put a price tag to a lot of those elements, we're looking at like a 20% bump on your expenditures, in terms of the new number of days and the hours you can work and the PPE measures. It's not a simple solution. And then back it up into television, the broadcasters have been hit huge in terms of their advertisers pulling back and moving down. And so it's a weird little, it's not like just the pause button was hit. It's just cascading effects here that are going to take a while for them to ramp back up. So it's going to be very interesting to sort of stay tuned on this space and see how other filmmakers and broadcasters and financiers and the bonds and the banks all sort of, I feel like we all have to get into a circle and shake hands at the same time, realizing that we're jumping into what is now sort of the new unknown before or absent a vaccine.
Well, they've probably got about 6 to 8 months of supply in the pipeline, with pictures that are being completed and television shows that are in the delivery process now. But then it's empty and nothing new is starting. I mean, there are some things I heard that they're going to start on Monday back in New Zealand on Avatar 3 or whatever it is. And but of course, those guys have more money than God. So for them, they can achieve, and they were already in full-blown pre-production. So it's going to be a little bit easier. And also New Zealand, you're so far away from everything else. It also has one of the best recovery rates of anywhere else in the world. It's a different animal. But, if you're talking about my film, we were already tightly budgeted. Now to add 20%, and we've already sold the thing, so I can't get any more money. So how are we going to do that? Now I go to the director and go, well, you got 20% less because I got to pay for PPE and people that watch other people, make sure they don't screw around with the virus. It's like, ugh. And then of course there's going to be the whole policing of it, because film crews aren't created equally. You've got your higher echelons tend to be more educated about things like this, more respectful of maintaining the rules. And then you get guys that come on and, hey, I'm doing a Joe job, I'm booking onto this film for 2 days as a fourth grip, and frankly he's not going to care the same as the key grip, so there may be big issues where we have trouble with crews not following the guidelines. And then it's always a question with extras, depending on where you are. If you've got a professional cadre of extras, you can count on them. But if you're up in the boonies and you're working with local townspeople as extras for the first time, they're not going to be as aware or as caring. So there's all kinds of things. Believe me, I lie in bed awake going, how the hell are we going to do this? So I mean, I pray for a vaccine. That's what I do.
Yeah. And even on the writing side, like in our rooms, we're pondering, it's like, do you write stuff down at the moment? Being like, well, we probably don't need extras here. Can we set this somewhere else so that is, whatever the new normal is going to be when we finally get something to a production stage, but then will audiences, will they actually enjoy watching programming that everyone stands 6 feet apart and, and there's no extras, or you're recycling extras, that type of thing,
Yeah, I was on a conference yesterday and said, oh, well, you make extras up, digitally. Well, yeah, we can, but it costs money. So,
It can cost a lot more than hiring the extra, that's for sure.
yeah.
So with that being said, David, with the writing, kind of, when do you put ink to paper? Are you guys kind of discussing, like, you were prepared to process this kind of content, and now with COVID, with people being confined and losing their jobs, do you think there's going to be a different type of content that might be more desirable?
Yes and no. I think it's illuminated some of our productions where you're like, oh, actually, what was a criticism of it previously, that it was only a single environment, drama, now actually becomes a selling feature, because we're in the same environment episode after episode, and it's about that claustrophobia is now actually our friend in terms of a selling point with the networks of, hey, this actually will be less less risky and more risk averse, because we're not having location moves every day. We're not having a cast of thousands that we have to deal with. It's a tight contained 12 or however many casts that are there. So we're seeing some positives in terms of that you wouldn't necessarily have thought coming into this. In terms of the other stuff, we're not really adjusting it just yet. It's too early to do that, and I feel like it also could potentially harm the creative in some respects if you try and gerrymander it into this box that we don't actually know what this box is just yet. It's too early. It's still too early, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And then,
Brendan, if you mean, doing COVID-based stories, my thinking would be, when this passes, people are going to be fed up with it and not going to want to remind it too much. So,
Yeah, agreed.
we're not out there developing the great COVID-19 story at the moment.
but are you guys seeing a shift at all in watching habits, like things like maybe, the zombie stuff, is that less popular because people are more confined and more into watching something that might be more family driven?
I think
Has
the
COVID
genres
affected
are
that?
still there. Yeah. I think right now people are
Yeah.
craving a little comedy, but you can't just pull one of those out of your ass. So we're going to continue developing the stuff that we've been developing, which are based on good stories, and and just hoping that the world gets back to something reasonable. I mean, I was approached yesterday by somebody who sent me a great script that we couldn't actually put together, and he said, "I have a great idea. Let's do this as animation."
Yeah.
Okay. So that's not such a great idea. So
with the uncertainty behind COVID, with so many independent films and lower budget films, like you mentioned here in Canada, that you're so heavily dependent upon things like Harold Greenberg Fund, the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund, or
Mhm.
Telefilm. A lot of those are government-funded agencies, and this year the money has been allocated. So what's there is there. But if this continues to go on too long, or the government talks about the increasing deficit that it's getting into after supporting everybody through this terrible time, is there going to be money left over for the arts next year? Has there been any discussion about is there still going to be a CFC, a Telefilm, a Harold Greenberg?
well, I think so. I mean, certainly the Liberal government has always been supportive of the arts, and I think will remain so. If we were talking about a conservative government, then maybe another issue. That being said, what's going to happen in Ontario? Uh, you know, yeah, there may be some retrenching, but other provinces have other priorities. Like Manitoba has just re-upped and made permanent their tax credits, so I think they're going to be fairly safe. British Columbia. Look, these things, they come and go, and Ontario, British Columbia, Quebec have all been pretty staunch supporters of the arts, and I don't think their funding is going to go away anytime soon or in any kind of radical way. And certainly the Trudeau government so far, $500 million to support the arts right now has been, just for COVID-19 measures, has been, pretty welcome on top of
Yeah,
the other
there's a recognition at both the federal and provincial levels right across the country of the film and television industry is a huge economic driver. We're not talking small dollars here. The GDP of the industry is into the billions, um, across most provinces, and so like that's not a drop in the bucket. So they're taking it very seriously, and I think that 500 million, that was a very strong message from the federal government. We haven't forgotten about you. We know you're hard hit. We know you're probably at the back of the bus there with concerts and sports and restaurants reopening. Um, so they're definitely trying to make sure that we can all stay, afloat until we start to figure this out. Um, so I think that's all very positive. And I know that like our industry associations from the CMPA and also the heads of the CMF and Telefilm, they've been, huge supporters of all of this. And that's part of why you're seeing such a rapid response. I know it seems like 2 months is a long time to wait, but that's actually lightning speed for government,
Yeah, exactly.
to unleash this type of funding, and the reality is, content's not going away. There's an insatiable demand for it, not just within Canada, but across the world. And so I think, we just sort of need some time for things to stabilize, and it will come back to normal eventually. And I
Yeah, and then the
think all
other
these
thing that people don't even think about is that border. Right now, that border's closed.
oh
So,
yeah, yeah,
all that American money that flows into Canada for television and feature films, they're desperate to come back and would like to come back, but until that border opens, nothing is going to happen. And we don't know when that border is going to open. Right now it's what, June 21st, but it could be extended. The way things are going in the United States, their numbers keep climbing like crazy. There are 96,000 deaths today and almost 1,600,000 cases. They're not slowing down fast enough to get that border open, I'm afraid. So there's issues like that as well.
Right. Well, we don't want to spend too much time just talking about COVID, but at the last kind of recap for it is, it is one of those things that you can't really prepare for. It kind of happens out of the dark. But do you guys have any tips for how kind of people could safeguard themselves from something like this in the future, or kind of any tips for proceeding forth and keeping their head above water?
Lots of hand washing stations.
Yeah, right. No, look, I went through SARS, and I was the only one shooting in the country when we did when SARS was here. We were doing Resident Evil 2, the second of the Resident Evils, and like I was a hero for still shooting. But we didn't have the crazy things that we basically hand washing and wore masks and things like that. But it wasn't as dangerous. It was actually a more dangerous disease, but it wasn't as widespread. But nothing like this. I've seen nothing like this, and people keep comparing it to the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which I did not have anything to do with. But we got to hope that we're nothing like this Spanish flu, because there the second wave was much more serious than the first. So that's the other thing, is we don't know if there's going to be a second wave or more of these diseases coming out of China or Southeast Asia or Africa. That's where a lot of this cross contamination between animals and human beings are is taking place. And this happened, came out of the blue. Nobody was prepared for it. I think we're going to be better prepared for the next one, but this one ain't even over yet as far as we know. So I don't know what to tell you to be prepared. What did I do there? Anyway, I lost the image.
Yeah, I would say, like, I don't want to say this is a good thing, but at least the entire world is in this together. This isn't one country is falling behind. So we're all being affected, at a roughly equal rate. So we'll get back to work, but Don's absolutely right. That border is a huge issue for Canada. And that, I think, will delay us that much further to sort of getting back to whatever the new normal ends up being.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I'm going to pick up another question here. So let's go back to some development stuff. Just lost it. What is the process for pitching to you guys? How do you suggest people reach out and kind of contact you with their ideas?
Well, from a legal standpoint, we don't accept unsolicited pitches. So come in through your lawyer or your agent, your managers. That sort of is something that we have to adhere to from a legal standpoint. But basically, we don't have a cycle. It's year round. Good ideas. They're not on a calendar, right?
Yeah, no, that's it. And feature film, we're winding down the feature film division a little bit. The economics and the outlook are not as good as they used to be. It's unless you're doing a tentpole superhero or something based on incredibly strong IP, it's not a winning proposition much. So, I'm slowly, getting away from the feature film side, maybe another 2-3 features. So I'm not really looking for stuff at the moment. If something comes in from a trusted partner, I'll look at it. But I'm really not encouraging people to pitch me feature films at this stage of the game.
And David, for you, it's all got to come through an agent or through a lawyer, I'm assuming.
Yeah, just similar to what Don said there as well. It's through people that are trusted partners that we've already worked with or we have a long-standing relationship with. But yeah, otherwise, I would suggest if you have an agent or a manager or a lawyer who works in the industry, have them reach out to us and submit that way.
Perfect. I got a question here from Film Co-op. Is it important to have a U.S. president as a producer? How do you recommend establishing relationships outside of Canada for those who hope to start co-productions?
What? Wait a minute. What was that? A U.S.
A U.S. president?
Presence.
Presence.
Oh, presence.
Yeah. No, but it helps to be known.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reality is, as Don sort of alluded to there, the feature film industry is kind of collapsing in a lot of respects, and it's turning globally now. And so you're seeing a lot more co-production happening because there's fewer dollars from, many other sources, and so you're cobbling those all together. And so a U.S. presence, absolutely, it helps. You can get dollars from there, but in likelihood, what's actually happening is you're getting pre-sales from smaller countries, cobbling those together and partnering with your own local countries, on the feature film side. And you're actually seeing a lot of that happening now on the television side. Just sort of going back to the Game of Thrones of it all, you know, it's funny. I've got a few friends that have never watched Game of Thrones, and they tried watching it recently, and they're like, I couldn't get into it. Just the special effects weren't that great. I was like, what? So the Game of Thrones raised the bar from, here to way up here into the stratosphere in terms of TV. And every season they've continually raised that bar further and further. And that's where the state of television is now. Audiences are so sophisticated, and budgets are continuing to go up. And now, because of COVID, we're going to see them go up 20%, 30% more. And how do you find those dollars? Well, it's through co-production and through, the globalization of content. And so you're going to see a lot more of a push towards partnerships, I think, but also partners on localized content, because no one really knows internationally what travel restrictions are going to be like. And if you can even have your cast, come in to shoot for you, so I think you're going to see a lot more, what's hyper local is now universal in its appeal. So shows like A Broadchurch or stuff like that will still really sort of resonate with audiences internationally, but it's something that you can do in a very local context.
Have you guys had any conversations or, any thoughts about doing the whole crew and cast quarantine in order to get a production going? Or is it more you'd rather kind of wait to kind of see how things are going to develop before doing something like that?
I don't know how you can quarantine an entire crew and a cast. I mean, that's the only way you can do it is in a first-class hotel, which again adds even more cost to it. And if and then people are always going to want to break quarantine to go see their families, and it's it's tough enough getting actors to leave Los Angeles for Toronto or wherever if many of them want to be able to go back on weekends and things like that. Well, with quarantine you can't. So there's just so many things. And then who are you quarantining? You're quarantining the drivers, you're quarantining the extras, or it's I've heard of this happening on very, very tiny films with a crew of 5 or so, and then a cast of 2 or 3 type of thing. That you can pull off if you have the proper project. But one of my movies, can you imagine trying to quarantine everybody on a Resident Evil, or
No.
God, Pompeii?
Well, even the UFC was contemplating doing this all on an exotic island somewhere, and even they had to abandon their plans to do that because it just the logistics behind it, and no one, you're going to find that your people don't want to be away that long from their own homes and families.
Yeah. So we got a great question here from Jen. What does DC Television think of shorter form digital content? Particularly given the circumstances, do you think this could be a chance for the indie projects with skeleton crews to prevail?
Yeah, for sure, especially on those smaller projects, absolutely. But I'm not 100. I'm still not 100% convinced that there's a business model on the shorter order, shorter websodic content. We might be getting there. Like, Quibi is still in its early days, but even they haven't had the same uptake in terms of subscribers that, say, the Disney Plus has or HBO Max is projecting towards. So is there a business model there? Well, I think the business model right now is shoot it, get it out there, get interest, and get an order for something that's larger. Right.
Yeah.
So if it's all calling card based, yeah, absolutely. There's definitely an opportunity for you to stand out right now. But is it a business model? I'm just not 100% convinced yet.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What exciting projects are you guys hoping to get back to, or what were you working on and had to stop amidst the COVID crisis?
Well, the picture that we had in early pre-production was called The Night Knows, which is a mystery thriller to be directed by, well, written and directed by Jamie Dagg, who did The River. And, we were very, very excited about that, and we're hoping to get back to that. At the same time, I'm, with my French partners developing another movie based on a video game called Fatal Frame that Christophe Gans, who was the director of the first Silent Hill, will be directing. And those are the two most exciting. I have in the can that's going to be coming out. We were accepted at Cannes, and now Cannes not happening. So we're looking forward to Toronto Film Festival, and that's for Death of a Ladies' Man. So with Gabriel Byrne, Brendan Gleeson, Brian Gleeson. Hang on a quick second.
Yeah, and so in terms of on the TV side, Brendan, we're very fortunate that we didn't have anything that was in production at the moment or in prep, because we didn't have to sort of shut down and deal with a hiatus. Yeah. Some of the issues that we're dealing with right now is we do have stuff that's in heavy and deep into the financing stages. And unfortunately, we have contracts that are in front of us that we can't sign off on because I don't know when we can facilitate delivery. And so that's a bit of our frustration right now on that front, where we have a lot of interest on these projects, but we just don't know when we can even start to film, let alone deliver and contemplate, a premiere for season 1, episode 1 type of thing. What we are doing right now, though, is we're sort of looking at those orders and going, okay, is 10 or 13 feasible, or should we look at a 6-episode arc instead, or an 8-episode arc, so that it's a shorter shooting window, less chance for risk. So like those are some of the conversations and meetings that we're engaged in at the moment. In terms of the projects that we're working on, though, like Don mentioned earlier, House of Night, that's one that we're very excited about. It's an incredible world. It's the freshest take I've seen on vampires in ages, and so that's one that we're sort of deep on at the moment. That I think we'll see where that lands once things sort of start to open up and clear up again, as the world starts to normalize. And then we've got several other projects that sort of they span a little bit of everything. One is I can't say too much, unfortunately, because they're not necessarily public at this stage, but there's a good stuff. Like, we're never bored, let's put it that way. We're always able to jump from one project and one phone call to the next.
Well, that's a good problem that you want to have, I guess.
Yeah.
Michael asked a good question. With a backlog of movies and TV shows waiting to go into production once it's safe to do so, will the Canadian content creators be able to attract top-tier crew, or is it going to be a massive bidding war for producers trying to get their normal guys back?
I don't know. It's a total unknown. It really depends on how the industry opens up and when. I mean, I think the guys with the big bucks are going to be able to open up first, and the guys without the big bucks are, I think, going to have to wait for a vaccine. So it's somewhere in the middle, so.
Do you think TV series will come back before film, or they're kind of all going to happen at the same time?
When I think of what things were set up and all set to go, they were mostly television, American television. There was some Canadian television, but the Canadian projects that I know that were set up, they were all, tightly budgeted, and how they're going to be able to absorb a 20% hit is going to be tricky. They're going to have to be relooked at. So, it's the unknown is the unknown. And until we know what it is, it's going to be tough. But I would say, if you've got the bigger bucks, you're going to be able to proceed pretty much as you were. But if you don't have those spare dollars, it's going to be tougher.
Is it going to be a major problem for the people that were a couple episodes in or maybe halfway through their feature to come back and have such a drastic change in rules where the first half of what you shot is going to be, how do you marry the two together afterwards?
Well, without hurting the program, that's the thing. So depending on how complicated the show was, you know, and what kind of intimacy was involved with the actors. I mean, look, if it's a, you know, a police drama where, you know, you're shooting at bad guys and things like that, that tends to be easier to do without having to, you know, all sorts of quarantine stuff and everything else. But, you know, if it's an intimate drama, you know, with a lot of people very close to each other, it might be a little harder to do. You know, I think of, you know, you think of the shows that are out there now that are like Mrs. America, if they had been in the middle. Well, that's a really tricky show to be doing it because of very big crowd scenes, lots of major cast all in the same rooms and things like that. A show like that would be tougher than, say, you know, something that's set on a space station, like what's that show that gets done
The
out of our
Expanse.
place? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It really depends on the show.
Do you find things might move away from being studio based to being outside? Would there be less restrictions on the crews?
Well, if it's out in the field, but if it's out on the streets of Toronto, no, because that's expensive. So it's cheaper to shoot in stages, and it's, you know, it's more controllable in a studio. But then again, there's not a lot of studio space. You know, we were already, you know, starved for studio space in Toronto. Is it going to be better, worse? I think it'll be a little better at the beginning, but, you know, then it's going to get busy again.
Right. Ashley asks, is Don Carmody Productions hiring? And when you are, how does a person go about finding what positions may or may not be open?
Hiring. There's nothing to do. No, we're not hiring at the moment. Once everything opens again, possibly. We're always, you know, but it really depends on what stage of production we're at.
And how do people go about reaching out to find out if there's an assistant position for the director, PA, that kind of thing?
Well, we basically, when we're hiring corporately, we will put out postings either through sometimes on Playback or LinkedIn, you know, the usual job boards. But then on a production basis, those usually go out through the guilds and unions or the heads of departments. Will typically, you know, start to hire out at that point. You know, we're always collecting resumes throughout the year, and when our productions do start, anyone that we've sort of met with or that caught our eye will sort of pass those along to the various heads of departments, and with a suggestion of you should meet with this person, see if they're right for this production or that one.
Great. One question that I've actually seen come up a few times here is you guys do a lot of work with young and, you know, emerging filmmakers. What mistakes do you see that they tend to do that can be completely avoidable? And, you know, what are your kind of tips for those individuals?
Well, Don, you've kind of worked the most with first-time filmmakers. Maybe you've got a few more stories to share here.
You know, there was stuff going on. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that thing, he showed up early, even though he told me he was going to push. So what was the question again, Brendan? I'm sorry.
When you're working with emerging filmmakers, because you do it a lot, you know, what are the common mistakes that you see them do that, you know, more often than not can be completely avoided?
Thinking that they know how to edit a movie. That's the big thing. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, most of them are that I've worked with have been fairly good on set, you know, and they're pretty good at dealing with actors, but knowing how to control a big crew or you know, a crew that's there to help them and having them convinced that they need that help is one thing, but I find it really falls apart for young directors when they get into the post-production side. You know, it's I don't know how many times I've said to them, why is that shot still there? Why is that shot there? Well, don't you remember how hard it was, and it was raining, and how cold, and blah 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 blah. And you know, I said, you remember it, but you're not seeing it for the, you know, the forest for the trees. It's a boring shot. Get rid of it. You know, all he remembers is how hard it was to get that shot, and he's bound and determined he's not going to lose it, whether it's going to jeopardize the movie or not. I've seen that countless times with young filmmakers. So, you know, and then of course when they bring me their first cut, and it's, you know, like, you know, an hour and a half too long, then the serious chopping has to, you know, get done. So, you know, an experienced director is not going to bring me a picture that's an hour and a half too long. So.
And how do you react when you get stuff that's that fat?
Well, you work at it. Hang on a second. Okay, guys, I'm going to have to leave. I can take one more question. Is that okay?
Yep. All right. Well, then why don't we wind it down? You know, we appreciate you guys taking the time to talk with a bunch of these young and hungry emerging filmmakers. And, you know, I'm sure we've got most of the questions answered. Is there anything else that you guys kind of wanted to cover, or last kind of words of wisdom that you wanted to hand out?
No, it's just be prepared. It's a very tough business. Be careful. You know, it's what you wish for. It's, you know, it's not easy, and it's not, you know, it can be incredibly beneficial and incredibly rewarding, but it's not for the meek or the people that don't like to work hard. So anyway.
Well said.
Yeah.
David,
all right, guys.
Any gems?
Hey, thank you so much. Don and David, we won't take up any more of your time today. We really appreciate it. We had feeds that were hopping. Everybody
great.
really appreciates the time. So thank you so much. To everybody out there, we have great films tonight at 9 p.m. on Super Channel, starting at 9 p.m. A Perfect Plan feature, which is preceded by the short film Buzzard. And we have awesome industry panels and events happening next week as well. So please check out our website for that. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Great.
Hello, my name is Wendy Potonsky, and I'm the managing partner and owner of Retake Furniture Rentals. Retake is once again a proud supporter of the Canadian Film Festival and is working to contribute to the Canadian film and TV industry by making it an easy and sustainable place to do business. Retake understands the importance of set design and the dynamic nature of the film and TV industry, which is why we created a company to specifically support Canadian filmmakers. Retake provides sustainable short and long-term furniture rental options to meet production schedules and product needs. Our in-house upholstery services can tailor our product to meet your set design requirements and match your color schemes. We use sustainable approaches to minimize product going to landfill when you no longer need the furniture on your set. Retake can also assist you in setting up your office with sustainable alternatives to keep your team working safely as we all head back to work during this unprecedented time. Our goal is to help you create memorable sets. Stay safe, everyone, and enjoy the films and shorts at this year's Canadian Film Festival.